Welcome to A Pair of Bookends, the book club you can carry anywhere. We are your hosts and hopefully your new bookish pals. I'm Hannah MacDonald.
And I'm Lydia Clare. Welcome to a bonus books episode where we get to highlight the books we think should be firmly on your radar. Today we get to delve into Darling Girls, a thrilling page turner about sisterhood, secrets, love and murder. We meet Jessica, Nora and Alicia, three girls who were raised by a loving foster mother on an idyllic farming estate. Only all was not as it seemed, and now it's time to return home as adults after a grisly discovery. Are the sisters innocent victims or prime suspects for murder?
Sally Hepworth is a Melbourne-based writer. She's the New York Times bestselling author of 9 novels. Several of her books have been optioned for TV and film, including The Mother-in-Law, which was optioned for a TV series by Hollywood actor and producer Amy Poehler. Sally has sold over 1 million books worldwide, and her work has been translated into over 20 languages. Her latest novel, Darling Girls, is out now in Australia and New Zealand, and will be published in the US and the UK this month. We're so excited to have Sally joining us today. Welcome to A Pair of Bookends.
Hello, thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here with you guys.
Oh, we're thrilled to have you.
And can we just say that Sally is currently in her writing den? You can't see it, but it is like the most idyllic, wonderful little palace of writing retreats I've ever seen. We would just like to start by asking you our favourite question, which is, what are you currently reading?
Well, I was saying before, I've actually got about 5 books on the go, which is very common for me because I like to have an audio book, I like to have a paperback, and then I'm often also listening to or reading books for research. So it might be a memoir or nonfiction. The thing that I'm really loving at the moment is I've gone back and been rereading some of Elizabeth Strout's books, and nothing is better, I think, than Olive Kitteridge. It's my favorite, and it really helps me to get that voice of Olive Kitteridge. I think is just so special. And yeah, I'm probably halfway through that one right now. So highly recommend if anyone hasn't read it, and I think everyone has, then please read it.
Well, the thing is, we get recommended Elizabeth Strout all the time. I don't know if Hannah. I don't know if you've read her yet.
I've
not yet.
Oh, yeah.
And neither of us have read her yet. And every time someone mentions her, I'm like, I must remember to read that.
Oh, I'm so glad, because I thought that was a bit obvious. I like to sometimes give recommendations that people wouldn't have heard of, but I'm so glad. Read Olive Kitteridge. You're welcome.
Thank you. Fabulous.
I've got My Name Is it My Name Is Lucy Barton? Is that what it's called?
Yeah.
I've got that one, but yeah, I've not got Olive Kitteridge, so I'm excited. But was Olive Kitteridge adapted, or have I made that up?
Oh, I don't know. I don't tend to watch the if they're adapted. I'm a real book
Really?
Yep. I find that it just doesn't do it for me. I prefer to read the words, and sometimes I will. If people are going to see a movie or something, I'll go, but it's not. Yeah, I prefer the book.
Oh, Hannah's an absolute killer for an adaptation.
Oh,
you can't get her away from them.
I'm always so interested to see like how somebody's took it from page to screen. I just think it's so fascinating, and the differences in like what a director can do, and if it's portrayed in the same way as it is in the book, and if the characters are sort of the same. Like I find it so interesting. But how do you feel when your books are being optioned? Like, is that something that you don't like?
No, it's exciting. Of course it's exciting for it to be adapted, and I'm interested to see what they will do, because you say I think that so much of the magic of screenplays and film and TV is that it's casting and it's directing, all of those things, but which is out of my control. So I'm always interested to wow, they'll probably do a good job. But as a viewer, I'm much more. I already know what's going to happen if I've read the book, and so I am really just watching it to see what they've done with it, and that's just never pleasurable for me as actually discovering the story. So yeah, that might be a weird thing to say. I don't think I've ever said that before, but that's how I feel.
It's not weird. I think it's just really interesting because, like Lydia said, I'm a sucker for them.
Most people are.
It's interesting how you say, like, obviously because you know the ending and stuff, and or you know, like the plot lines, it's a bit less kind of interesting to you. But you're a rereader, so you love to, so, you know, and that's quite interesting that you still love to go back and reread books.
That's so true, except that when I reread, and the books that I do reread, like Olive Kitteridge, it's not my first time. Recently, I reread Anne of Green Gables, which obviously I know what happens. I'm reading it for something specific. Like it might be that I'm reading it to, like I said before, I love Olive Kitteridge's voice. And there's a whole lot of minor characters. It's sort of almost a book of related short stories. And I was reading it with my writer's eye of, you know, how are they achieving this? And other times I might be reading it for the setting, because I'm writing a book that's set in that time or that space, as opposed to, or I'm just, you know, the first time I got lost in the story and then I want to go back and look at the nuts and bolts of what they did. So yeah, I'm looking for something else, I guess, with my rereading.
100%. Now let's get on to your book, because we've got many questions for you. I'm just going to thank you on behalf of all British people that you have a little one-eyed terrier in your book called Boris Johnson. So that was brilliant. Very much enjoyed that. Thank you. We're not the biggest fans of Boris. I'm just going to say that, and that is all. We aren't a politics podcast, so let's just leave it there.
No comment.
But you've been described as the queen of plot twists. And after finishing this book, I think I'm inclined to agree. You said in an interview that you think most of those twists come from your gut rather than being plotted out. But where do you think this natural instinct stems from?
Oh gosh, I recently, someone said to me, "Are you worried because you are known for your twists? Are you worried that you're going to run out of twists?" And I said, "Well, now I am." I didn't even kind of realize that I was known for my twists, or kind of set out going, right, you know, I need to add a twist because I do twists. It's so rare that I would do anything as kind of orchestrated as that. I really just go into each book with, what is this book about, and how can I, you know, deliver it as a page-turning, you know, thrilling novel with a bit more resonance. You know, I always like there to be something else going on beyond the plot, to do with the characters and the relationships. And the twist really is about my gut feeling of, have we done enough here? Have we closed this up? Is there a way that I can make, you know, can the twist do double duty for, you know, being a gaspy kind of shock, but also something that feels like it was there from the start? Like, of course, that was, you know, supposed to be there. Of course, this wouldn't have worked. And so in that sense, you can only know when you're writing it and when you've written it, as opposed to when you've plotted it, whether the book needs it or not. And I don't want to do a kind of gratuitous twist for twist's sake either. Like, I think that can almost go the reverse, in terms of, you know, you like the twist to up the ante and make people more, you know, like they liked it, but then they're like, oh damn, good twist. But I think sometimes it can just be a bit added on. So yeah, I mean, it has to come from the gut, I think.
In the editing process, do you, when you kind of, you look at your plotting and you look at the twist, especially, have you ever taken a twist out?
I don't think I have. I think I have been more likely to add them.
Yeah.
I don't, because twists do tend to come later in the plot for me. And if I've got all the way through a draft and a twist isn't working, I would normally pick it up myself rather than wait for the editor to do it. Generally speaking, that's something that's obvious enough that I'd go, oh, I don't know, I think I'm gonna yank that one out. I don't think I've been told to remove one, but never say never. There is other things. It could happen. It tends to be more and more as the books go on. The editing process is about refining, sometimes plot lines, refining, you know, what the book is really about. And that's what helps me to. So, for example, with Darling Girls, it ostensibly is about 3 foster siblings who grew up together and who, at the beginning of the book, are adults, and they receive a phone call that a body has been found underneath the home where they grew up, and has been there a long time, you know, since they were there And, that's a kind of, and then they have to go back and they have to, talk about their childhood and discuss what happened and who's guilty and who's under the house. But it really, that's what the book's about. But what it's really about is about what is family and what is, how important is the role of blood. These three siblings are not, in fact, blood siblings. They are sisters by choice and having grown up together. And the book is an exploration of that. And so then the twists are sort of born of that too. If they don't relate to that, it feels added on and a bit gimmicky. And so once I kind of got to that point, I then can work backwards or go, oh, this is a great twist, because that actually reinforces the kind of themes that I'm trying to build.
But how do you, because obviously, like you said, you're exploring these big themes, but your book is so like pacey, and like Lydia read it within 24 hours. So like it's, and you talk about, using plot twists to kind of up the ante, but what else do you kind of do when do you have to have like something in your writing routine to create this pace? I don't know how pace kind of comes into it. Like, how do you write pace?
I don't know either. The more I write books, the less I know. I often do speaking events with a friend of mine who's an author, Lisa Ireland, and she used to be a teacher. And so I often, when there's a craft question, I just throw to Lisa. I'm like, Lisa will be able to. I don't know. But I think what I will say is that, we feel our way through. Like, it's kind of back to the gut, and I'm very easily bored. I'm your classic, well, I'm an elder millennial, I think, technically, and I just don't have tolerance for if there's not anything happening. And if there, I want to know, I want there to be a puzzle to solve, or I don't want to read pages and pages of beautiful prose. So that's me. And so I imagine that my reader doesn't want to either. And if I'm bored, well, then I'll throw something in. And it's a balancing act, because you also don't want to be throwing in everything in the kitchen sink. And I think earlier in my writing career, I probably did that a bit too much. And then, it's about the choices that we make. And yeah, I don't know that I could even write it down, because there's no real rule to it. You just have to feel your way through.
Absolutely. And one of the things about this book, and you just touched on it, that I found so compelling, was the story of these three sisters. You write each sister so distinctively and with such personality. Each one is just absolutely fabulous in their own little way. Can you tell us a bit about why you chose these specific personalities for them, and what it was like creating the dynamic between the three of them?
I mean, so you use the word chose and creating, which I always think I didn't. And this sounds quite airy-fairy, and I'm not that way. I'm actually quite a pragmatic, hard-nosed Australian woman. But I never feel like I create characters or I choose them. Often, especially when there is three characters, as there is in this book, there's something about three that I think works really well. And I haven't always done that. I've had, more, and I've had less. Often in the case of three, there will be one character that comes to me the most strongly, and that was Nora in this case, Nora with an H, who, for those listening, is one of my favorite characters that I've ever created. And my fear was that she might be a little bit unlikable, because she's she's very rigid in her beliefs. She is very affected by her upbringing in foster care, and she is, has a tendency toward violence, which has got her into some scrapes with the law. And there's some quite funny parts where, she just punches her date in the face because she he was bothering her when she was on the phone, and her instinct to do that stuff, I just found such a delight to write, and kind of like, imagine you could do that. That would be so good. And so she was so fun, but also so vulnerable. And so, her beliefs about sex, for example, were very, and she was in control of it, and she was not being taken advantage of, and I won't say too much about that, but she was very, sex is a means to an end in terms of getting jobs done. It's something, it's transactional. I can give it and then I can receive things. And I didn't make her up. Like, I feel like she she came to me, how could I make up this character? And then from her, the other characters existed almost in, you know, in relation to her. So then there is the character of Jessica, who is, you know, she's so type A, and she runs a home organizational business where she does that kind of color coding, Pinterest worthy styling of pantries and bathrooms, and has, you know, she's so protective of her sisters and looks after them. And of course, we find out very early that she has been stealing things from people's bathroom cabinets, specifically Valium, which she uses to help kind of put a dampener on some of her big feelings. And so she was just such a natural kind of character to just juxtapose against Nora's wild, you know, and the way that they drive each other crazy is so fun. And then, of course, you know, Alicia was just the perfect, you know, final piece of that trio. Someone who's so warm and caring, and she's a social worker, which is, you know, in direct response, obviously, to her upbringing in foster care. She wants to make the world a better place, and she's, you know, calm and kind, but she is also affected by her upbringing and finds it really hard to create relationships. And I think they came to me as the way that they were. And then what was fun is that I got to go back into their childhood, because I did write it in the kind of sequential order that the book is read. The reader will read it in that way. And I was able to go, oh, this is why, you know, Alicia is the way she is, and this is why. And so that's what I mean about the resonance. It helps lead me into what the plot is, what's going to happen to them to make them like this. And it's a bit of a discovery for me as well.
I thought Nora was brilliant. I was completely obsessed with her. That getting men to do odd jobs around the house, I was like, this is perfect. It was such a good trait to write. Like, I absolutely adored her. I thought she was fantastic.
I loved her impulsiveness. She just went with her feelings at any point. And also her ability to lie, but her lies were not necessarily good ones, but her commitment to the lie, like she was thoroughly, like, you know, she has these 3 dogs, she takes them with her everywhere, and she's like, they're service dogs, and they're clearly not. They're clearly not service dogs, but she's so committed to the lie that nobody kind of questions her, because you can't, because she's got this compelling quality about her that people are just like, oh, well, if Nora says it, then okay.
Yeah, because they're like, they're service dogs, and she's like, yep. They're like, what for? IBS. 3? Yeah. Right. Okay. Yeah. Just like no argument.
She's amazing. She's amazing.
I am the mother of 2 neurodiverse children, and they're quite different. And I've created a character before, Fern in The Good Sister, who is a neurodiverse character. And I loved it. And I had my son read it. And what made me laugh, because one of the things that's really important to me in creating, but I am neurodiverse too. I have ADHD, but my kids are autistic. And it's really important to me that the character or the reader is laughing with the character or at themselves, rather than laughing at the character. And I kind of was happy that I'd done it when my son was reading about Nora, and he read this part and he was laughing, and I was like, well, which bit are you laughing at? And he goes, oh, neurotypical people are such idiots, you know. Oh, good. Like, and he was, you know, really enjoying the logic of the way that she did things, and that made sense to him. So I took that as a big tick.
100%. Is that not scary though, having your children read your work? Are you more afraid of your children reading it than anybody else?
Definitely my son, but also I find it very helpful because he's the world's best proofreader. There's not a mistake that he won't find. And he also doesn't like it when I use swear words in there. He's like, Mum, you've used the F word.
Oh.
And we're only on page, 27. But no, he's a wonderful reader. Certainly, and quite, he's a big reader, so he loves to read and always gives me pretty positive feedback. But he'll find every error. Don't worry about that.
I love that. I want to talk about a particular setting in your book, which is Wild Meadows, which is the foster home that your three main protagonists grew up together in, and as adults it's still a place that haunts them and it causes them anxiety the second they think about it. Did you have a particular image in mind when you were writing about Wild Meadows to give it this sort of unsettling presence?
Yeah, I did. A little bit like the characters, it came to me. I had this, I don't know if I read it somewhere. Sometimes you wonder, you think, oh, I invented this. And then you think, oh, no, maybe I read that in the newspaper, or maybe I saw that on the news, or maybe it came from another book. But it was very clearly, I had that a body was discovered when they were demolishing a house to build a McDonald's. And that is how the book is discovered. So I then pictured, it's on a motorway, like in a country kind of area, and then the farmhouse came, and it is, I suppose, it's set in Australia, this book, in the country, but I think that the image of Wild Meadows is a bit is familiar, whether you live in England or in America, where I have a lot of readers, or Ireland, or wherever you are. People can kind of really bring to mind that picturesque, beautiful white farmhouse, which is what where the girls grew up. And I really also loved the idea that something that looked so, beautiful and picturesque, it's always those things I think are inherently creepy, because you think, that looks really nice, and I don't know, now what is there? And I love that as a setup, that it can, you're automatically, feeling like something went down.
Yeah. It felt like when you first introduced to Wild Meadows, it felt a bit like the start of a horror movie, when like the new family have moved into the new house, and things are covered in dust sheets, and it's all old, and I was like, something terrible is going to happen here. I don't know what, but I just don't feel right.
That's what I want you to think. I'm glad that worked out.
Yeah.
No, it really does have this sort, it has this real unsettling presence, and I felt the same as Lydia. As soon as we arrive at this place, you're kind of like, what on earth is going on? And I think a lot of why the house feels so unsettling is about the person that lives in this house, but also sort of owns it, sort of oversees it. Like, I don't really know how best to describe her, and I am going to get onto her later, but I think definitely her presence in the house also kind of it adds to it. Absolutely. Like, she is terrifying.
And I also, in the similar way to the house, she comes across as being quite pretty, and I really wanted to play with that idea of how things look compared to how things truly are. So she was a bit of a mirror image of the house in that way.
Now, one of the things that I wanted to talk about was the concept of luck and being lucky, which seems to crop up throughout the book quite a bit, and the notion that when you've been through horrific experiences, somehow you are lucky to come out of the other side of it, which I think is ridiculous. But there's a little bit in the book that I just wanted to read out, because I think it really sums it up, and this is Alicia talking about luck. Love and security were the most basic of rights. Forcing these kids to believe they were lucky to have that was even more damaging than what some of them had experienced in care, Alicia thought. So, in summary, for me, the fact that the girls particularly, it's kind of like, oh, well, you're lucky to have come out the other side of this, when they've been through truly quite some horrific experiences. I think it's such an interesting approach to take. Why did you kind of include luck as a theme in the book?
Thank you. I'm glad that resonated. When I started writing the book, I actually put out a call out through social media to ask if anyone who had grown up in foster care in Australia would speak with me, and also so foster children, who obviously now adults, or social workers or foster parents. And I got a lot of them, and I ended up speaking with 12 women who grew up in foster care, around the age of the women in the book. And what was interesting was that these 12 women really ran the gamut of foster care experiences. And on one end, there was certainly one woman that I spoke to, a couple, who embodied the very worst of experiences that, I'm not going to go into it. We all know what kinds of things happen, and all of those things happened, and, multiple times. And, just the, never, before even getting into abuse, just being moved around, and, clothes in a garbage bag, and not knowing where you belonged, and really, really difficult circumstances, right through, at the other end to, there was one woman I spoke to, amazing woman, who her mother had died. She had a single mother. She died when she was 6, and she had a 3-year-old brother, no family. And they went and they lived with a lovely couple who raised them, and they stayed with them the whole way through. And they had a really positive experience in foster care. And she'd gone on and, a bit like Alicia, had created, all these wonderful things for foster children, programs and things. And there was everything in the middle, in terms of people's experiences. But every single woman that I spoke to said at one point or another that they were lucky. And I remember noticing that as I was playing back the interviews. And look, I mean, to be clear, sometimes they said, in the very worst case, there was a woman who said that she was lucky only to be sexually abused a few times, right? Like, this is, it's not a typical word that one would use. On the other end, she was saying, well, how lucky am I that I stayed with my biological sibling, and that, I was able to, have these good people in my lives. But at first I thought, this is good. Maybe it's the fact that they considered themselves lucky that means that they've survived, and all of them were living, pretty functional lives. Not to say they didn't have their wounds like we all do, but why were they all saying that? Because anyone who has lost their parent, whether they're dead or they're unable to care for you and have had to spend time in foster care, I think it's fair to say that that's unlucky, even if you have, gone on and had a positive experience. And it got me starting to talk and to go back and ask, the women as well, were you told that, to believe that you were lucky? And they said, no, but we just understood that, when you don't have your parents there, everything's luck. And you're so at the behest of whoever's making decisions for you. And that was the little glimmer, I guess. And this is why you can't necessarily plan books. That became the heart and soul of the book, this idea of what is lucky. And I think it's okay to say you're unlucky. You may be lucky in many ways that are not to do with this situation. You're unlucky, no matter how positive your experience was moving forward. That's okay to say that. And you're allowed to grieve it. So, yeah, I think I called the book The Lucky Ladies, and as I wrote the first draft, and then I don't know that it would have worked as a title, but it changed. But that's how much of a kind of theme and how important it was to me when I wrote the book.
I think it's really funny because we both noted down the same quote. Like, I've got that page folded down. Yeah, it's and I think, it's so interesting to hear that so many of these women had said to you that they felt lucky, and especially, saying that they felt lucky because they'd only been sexually abused a few times. Like, it's just kind of, I mean, for anybody that, like me and Lydia have read, and I'm not sure if you've read it, Lem Sasay's memoir. I think, is it called My Name Is Why, Lydia?
Yeah.
And he's a poet, and he writes this beautiful memoir about his experiences growing up in care, and it's horrendous, some of the things that he's been through. And I don't think that information is sort of like readily available to everybody. There's not a lot that I've read up on it or kind of seen represented on like TV or film or anything like that. So I think it's really great that you explored that. But how do you think that your kind of research and chatting to these women, how do you think it sort of shaped the way you wrote the book?
Yes, well, I mean, that the talking to the women is what gave me the lucky kind of thing. That's something I would explore. It also gave me their experiences, like little things like and I want to be clear first that this story is none of those women's stories. This is a made-up story. And, really what I was looking for the women for were an overarching theme, like what I got, as opposed to anyone's actual individual story. But I got things like, one woman told me about the day that her mother had died, and how she was collected at school and given that news, and then she was taken to a therapist's office, and her brother were in the therapist's office, and she had very vague memories, but one of the things she remembered was that the therapist wasn't wearing shoes, and he sat on the floor with his legs crossed, and he didn't have shoes on, and she remembered looking at his feet and wondering, why he wasn't wearing shoes. And that is kind of one of those moments. And I asked her permission, and I did use that in the book, because it's one of those moments that you can't create, I don't think.
Yeah.
You can't. And it says so much about what was happening in that little tiny 6-year-old's head, and going through something that they, and children do have lapses from extreme trauma to, I wonder why this person isn't wearing shoes. And so the fabric of, that kind of stuff I really got from these girls that I spoke to. A lot of the rest of the book, the real nuts and bolts of how foster care works, and how social workers do their job, and not just now but back then, a lot of that I turned to books for. I read a lot of memoirs written by social workers. I did speak to a couple of social workers, who had been social workers during the time the book was written as well. And really that period of researching is just about really trying to understand the world. So I read everything I could. I watched shows, and making sure that if I was going to write about this topic, I was going to do my due diligence and not kind of create a situation that's entirely implausible, or have people who know the world read it and think, well, that wouldn't happen. There may be mistakes in it and they're my own, but at least you've got to kind of do the work. And so I spend quite a lot of time on that. And then at the other end, I also had a social worker and a foster mother and a foster child read the book, just to catch anything that kind of slipped through.
So how long was the process then of kind of like research to writing?
Look, I write a book a year, which I have done for the last 10 years. Oh my God. But it's never the whole year is kind of spent at the keyboard like this. It's really, at a book a year, you're often straddling 3 books. And so, there'll be the book that you're bringing out, and doing these kind of interviews and things. There'll be the book that you're writing that's going to come out next year. And then there might be another book in between that you're editing, or you might get back for copy edits and things. So while the whole process from, fingers on keyboard to out there promoting it is about a year, there's lots of things that happen in between. And so it's very common. I'm about to head off on tour to America for Darling Girls. I'm reading a bunch of research materials for the book that I'm writing now. So that's happening. I'm writing a book now. So I'm a bit all over the place. It works well with I've got ADHD, so it's quite good for my jumpy mind to stay.
Where do you get so many ideas from though? Like, I mean, obviously me and Lydia have wrote before, but not books. And I definitely don't think I could be churning out a book a year. Like, I just don't, like that, the capacity to do that is just mind blowing to me. Do you ever feel stuck for ideas, or are they constantly coming to you? Is it a case of like, oh no, I need to shut that down while I'm trying to write this one? Like, what is that like?
I mean, a book is not just one idea. That's the thing, is that I sometimes will find myself stuck for, what am I going to write next? And not because I don't have an idea, but because I need to make sure that my editor's okay with it. I need to kind of make sure that it's not too similar to something I've written before. Like when it's, 9 books down the track, I'm kind of like, well, I kind of did that 2 books ago, or not too similar to another author's book that has, a friend of mine or someone that I don't know who's just had a really, big book that's quite similar. And so it's not so much the lack of ideas as it is the finding the right idea. But even then, a book is hundreds and hundreds of ideas, because every time you might say, right, I'm going to write a book about foster care, but then it's going to be about 3 sisters, and it's going to be about a body. And then as I keep going, well, it's going to be in this town, and there's going to be and so, it's constant ideas. So I think the premise of a story, that kind of high concept, this is what your book is about, is what gets the most press in the publishing world. And that's what everyone says, what if you run out of ideas? But the truth is you can't run out of ideas and write. You just have to keep having ideas. And, that's how you finish a book. But in terms of how it blows people's mind what everyone does all day, and while it's an art and a science, there's no question there is some creative magic to it. It's also my job. I'm a career author, and I sit down and I do the work, and I know how to write a novel. Some will be better than others, but in the same way, I sometimes, I've got lots of lovely friends who've got really interesting jobs, and one of them manages a hotel chain. And I'm like, what do you do? Like, you sit at your desk what do you do? And recently she was at lunch and one of the roofs of the hotels that she owns had collapsed and she was on the phone and she's chatting to us and then she'd go back and I'm like, I'm just freaking out. Like, how do you know how to deal with this? And she said, well, I think that all the time when I think, how did Sally write this book? And, we're all just doing our jobs and we've all got these kind of different skills of things that we know how to do. And it doesn't mean that it's not difficult at times, but, hopefully we're all kind of figuring out how to do our jobs.
I hope so.
Somehow, we're like swans. We're
just being impressed with each other that everyone can do their job.
So one of the things that I wanted to ask about was the concept of gaslighting and coercion. So it's difficult to talk about it without giving stuff away, so we will try to be vague. But it happens in several forms in the book, some minor and other very extreme ways. What role did gaslighting play for the sisters in the story overall for you?
Look, I think it's so funny that we've given it the name now, gaslighting, because, only since that, I think it was 1960s movie that we've had a name for it. And now it's almost become something that people throw around, there's a good and a bad thing because gaslighting is a form of abuse, isn't it? And that's making people doubt themselves is incredibly abusive. At the same time, I think that what it has done is given rise to the fact that it's everywhere. People do this, and people who are mentally unwell will do it in order because they can't exist in another way. They can't possibly kind of, sometimes the intent is to abuse and other times the intent is merely to protect themselves. And so I guess gaslighting has appeared in a number of my books because it's so widespread and it's so successful and effective at keeping people oppressed. And these three young girls, as they were growing up in foster care, they were already so vulnerable, but as they began to sort of band together, they were developing some power, and that wasn't something that their foster mother really wanted. And she only had a certain amount of tools to how she was going to keep control of them, to keep ostensibly maybe love from them. And it's a shame because I do think it's one of the most detrimental types of abuse, but it is also very difficult to prove, and a lot of people who've been gaslit don't even really know that they have been. So
it's got a kind of like an insidious nature to it. I think it's a very difficult thing because there is a moment in the book where the girls are talking about what's been happening and there's nothing tangible. It's so hard to be able to be like, well, this has happened and this has happened and this has happened, but collectively that doesn't mean much to an outside voice because it's so hard when you are being as we call it now, being gaslit. And at the time these are children as well, having to cope with that. And I think it was such an interesting approach that you took, and I'm really glad that you included it in the book because I think sometimes we get a sensationalized version of trauma, and I think that actually what you did was very well thought out and very realistic and very grounded in reality. And I think that's tantamount to your quality as a writer. It's not a question, it's a compliment.
I will take that. I allow compliments. But it actually, what you said made me think something else that the women said, and I kind of included it in the book at one point, is that foster children are generally not believed, and there is this stigma about being a foster child. But what the women said, and also I did take this and used it in the book, is that you're always a foster child. If you're a foster child, even if you're an adult, even if you have got a successful business, even if you have got you have, in spite of that, kind of been able to create a life which should give you, so much more, ground to stand on and so much more reason to be given respect. You're always a foster child in the eyes of the law and in the eyes of other people. And when the women, a couple of women said that to me, I thought, really, is that the case? And then I kind of caught myself thinking of, there was a case here in Australia of a woman who was found guilty years ago of murdering 3 of her children, and when they were infants. And recently she was released, and they found that, in fact, it was overturned, that there was a reason why these babies had died and she had not murdered them. And she'd always maintained her innocence. And I remember that case, and I remember thinking, would someone do that? And what do we know about her? And then it came out that she'd grown up in foster care. And I know that I went, okay. Not that that meant that she'd done it, but that gave me an extra little bit of colouring for who she was. And my judgmental brain went automatically. I thought, okay, well, whatever, there'll be some trauma there. Maybe that would cause it. And if I didn't know that about her, I would have been less likely to believe it. And so what does that say about it? We can't control our automatic judgment, but we can catch ourselves. And I think that is something that we need to start doing for the sake of everything. But, these poor children who've grown up with these poor women, and they deserve to be taken as seriously as anyone else. So we've got so many hang-ups we need to address.
I mean, I grew up on Jacqueline Wilson books, and for a lot of British kids, they knew the story of Tracy Beaker, and that was adapted and was a big TV show when I was growing up. So our kind of, I don't know how best to describe it, but our idea of what foster care looked like, or what a care home looked like, and what these children looked like were angry children. Tracy Beaker was this really angry character, and the workers around her weren't nice people. Some of them were, but there was one that she described as Elaine the Pain, and we had this sort of stereotype in mind of what these people are like, and you'd see Tracy act out as this child that had been kind of abandoned by her mother and left in this care home, and the assumption was, well, she's like that because of what she's experienced. And I think we do build these stereotypes. I did want to ask about Miss Fairchild, because I think, as Lydia was saying before, there's a lot of that sort of insidious nature to her. And there was a particular moment in the book that made me feel it made me feel sick to my stomach, really, when the children are kind of talking, they're talking as kids, and I think Nora's just arrived, and they say to Nora, you shouldn't have told her that you're afraid of the dark. And it's just kind of left at that. And you as the reader are going, what do you mean you shouldn't have told? What are they talking about? Why are they saying that to her? And it's that, it's these small moments that kind of build up and build this horrible case for what they've experienced. It isn't these big moments that they can kind of articulate to a police officer. It's those smaller moments that have caused them all these issues. And you are great at character building, and as we said before, we loved the 3 main characters, but Miss Fairchild in particular, she evoked this sort of rage within me and an upset, and I kind of felt anxious every time she reappeared. But how did you go about creating that character, and how did you kind of, I don't know, I suppose draw the line of how cruel you wanted her to be?
Okay, so there's 2 parts to that. I'll start with the second part. How do I draw the line? It's such a balancing act, because in one way, if you go into a book like foster care, there can be a danger in going too light in some sense, that you don't want to convey something. For example, a friend of mine, we were talking about this recently. She'd written a book set during the Holocaust, and she was saying, do I go there? Everyone kind of knows what happens in a concentration camp now. How much do I need to go with the horror of it? And we were talking about it, true, we don't want to do gratuitous horror, but we equally can't be sugarcoating a concentration camp, that we needs to pay respect and honor what happened. And I think that's what I tried to do with this book, to do the of what I thought happened to these girls and what made them the way that they were. At the same time, I always like to think about, what can I add, what can I do differently that isn't just sort of singing with the choir. And so, I have read books about physical abuse, we all have, and it also wasn't necessarily what I was hearing from the girls that I spoke to who'd grown up in foster, or the women, but who had been girls when they grew up in foster care. The very overt abuse tended to be dealt with, not always, because, for various reasons, but the more obvious the kind of abuse was, the easier it was to be dealt with by the authorities.
Mm-hmm.
But it was that more insidious game playing things that and a lot of talk of foster parents who were playing the kids off against each other and, playing favorites and all of those things that I are so damaging. So I really was, and I just, again, I'm going to say so annoying what a response, but I had to go with my gut.
Yeah.
A few scenes I wrote and then I pulled them back. A few scenes I wrote and then I added, there were a couple of scenes where something was happening and I thought, no, I can't pull that back, but what can I do? And they were moments where the girls were able to band together, and that kind of added some, something different to the scene. So it wasn't just gratuitous violence. It was about, like, now, we can see that these girls are going to fight back. And so it just, scene by scene, I had to decide what needed to be there and what didn't, and how I could tweak. And then you speak to some people will say, gosh, I found it really hard to read and I found it very, very heavy. And other people have said, I liked that you used a bit of a deft touch and you didn't kind of take it away. So, we all come at it with our own lens, don't we?
Yeah, I don't think you can shy away from the reality of those experiences. Like you said, you've spoken to so many different people who've experienced, horrendous things. It's important that we don't shy away from that and that we do, represent what real people have experienced. And there are fairly dark moments in the book, there's, and I'm not going to kind of say what, but the Bean story, that was a really upsetting scene. And I think it's important that you don't shy away from that. But then I think also showing the connection between the sisters and showing them kind of gang together, and like, that was really lovely because they have experienced so much trauma, and to kind of overcome that and to have each other was the sort of the balance in the light with the dark, I guess. And as an older sister I've got 3 sisters, so I felt very strongly reading this book and being like, if I had to watch anybody doing that to my younger sisters, like, like there would be blood. Like I wouldn't be able to.
Nora.
Yeah, I would. I'd get violent. Yeah, because I feel so strongly about them. So it was really nice that you sort of represented that connection and that brought the kind of lightness to it.
Oh, thank you for saying that. Yeah, I don't have sisters, so I always feel really, happy when people do, resonate with that. But also, I mean, as a human being, yeah, I think that would be, no one, I don't think anyone wants to see people being harmed, and
No.
these are children. And yeah, I think that in a way, what is so dark about the book also is what I hope provides what is uplifting about it, because it's about what we survive and how that, how we can kind of get each other through it.
Absolutely. And I don't think that you can come away from this book without feeling like you've, first of all, been through the ringer, because it really does take you through some emotions, but also that you've just had an absolutely thrilling ride. It is a fantastic book. And like Hannah said at the beginning, I did devour it in 24 hours because I just couldn't put it down. Before we let you go, I have to ask this of our authors. What are your literary influences?
Oh, okay. That's a hard one, because I don't necessarily think is an influence that I want to be. Okay, I've got one. Liane Moriarty, I think, was, is, and I'm lucky enough to know her now, and she is a big influence, and I certainly aspire to be like her. But then there are also so many authors who I don't think I write, Elizabeth Strout, and there's an Australian crime writer, actually she's British but lives in Australia, Jane Harper, who's a good friend of mine, who's just the most, have you read Jane's books?
Yeah, it's brilliant.
Wonderful crime. And Emily Giffin, who's an American author, is, her books really inspired me earlier on in my career as a reader, and kind of gave me the nudge to start writing. And even, I read a lot for my children as well, like to kind of get an idea of what I think they will like, and I'll pre-read, and sometimes it's even, I'll be reading those books thinking, gosh, this is so clever what they've done here, like I can do this. So in a way, I'm inspired by, everything I read, to, if it's good. I do what they're doing. So you're forever a student.
I mean, you've given us a great list of recommendations today already, but we do like to round off episodes by asking for a recommendation. So, do you have one for us?
Well, I have a TV show.
Gorgeous.
And even though I'm not, I should have a book, but what I have been absolutely devouring lately, and there's 2 series, and I started from the beginning, is Dr. Death. Have you seen it?
I've not heard of this, no.
It's got, the first series has got Joshua Jackson, Pacey from Dawson's Creek. Do you guys know? Are you too young? But he's like a horrible monster. So it's really quite satisfying to watch him. And it's a true, well, it's a reenactment of a true story about a doctor who was a doctor but ended up, just being, he's a horrendous narcissist, and watching, what he did as a doctor, terrifying, and I kind of find that perversely exciting. And then there's a second series about a different doctor, and it's sort of narcissistic or sociopathic, but in a completely different way. And I don't know, like it's made me terrified to ever have surgery, but it's also really compelling viewing of trying to just understand the inner workings of someone's brain. So I highly recommend both seasons.
I love stuff like that. I'm ready.
Yeah.
I think he's such a great actor as well, so I'm really excited for that.
He's fantastic in it, and they do some things to age his face as well, and it's definitely worth a watch.
Love that. I think you've given us a lot of recommendations throughout the episode with books as well, so I think it was nice to round it off with a TV show, because I think if you'd have given me any more books to read, I'd probably be I wouldn't be able to leave the house. So for our listeners, as I said in the introduction, Darling Girls is available in Australia and New Zealand, and is also out in the UK and the US this month, which is very exciting. I will pop a link in the show notes for you to buy yourselves a copy, because you will definitely want to be reading this. And Sally, where can our listeners find you on social media?
Probably my most active place is Instagram. So my handle is @SallyHepworth. You can also find me on Facebook. My website is sallyhepworthauthor.com. Say hello. I love to connect with readers on there, and let me know what you think of the book.
Wonderful. And I mean, we've said already how much we loved it, so I'm sure that everyone else will, and you have a huge fan base, and I'm really excited to kind of go back and look at your other books, because I'm new to your work, so I'm very excited.
Love a backlist.
Thank you so much, Sally, for joining us today. It's been an absolute pleasure to chat to you. For our listeners, if you enjoyed this episode, please do rate, review and subscribe so we can reach more of you. And if you want to give us a follow, you can do so at A Pair of Bookends Pod on Instagram, and at A Pair of Bookends on Twitter and TikTok. And lastly, Sally, thank you once again. It's been such a pleasure to chat to you today.
Thank you. That was a wonderful interview, and I'll come back next time if you have me.
Yes, please.
Cool.
Thank you for listening. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.